I think this review could be far shorter than it needs to be, or far longer than it should be, but I originally played Oceanhorn 2 back on iOS on the Apple Arcade, and quite frankly, if you own an iOS device, I'd go and play it over there, as there are a couple of things that make it a preferable choice, and it's not only the fact that it's a quarter of the price. With all that said, Oceanhorn 2 looks to take the original concept and move it into the full 3D realm, and the innumerable comparisons to Zelda are certainly true, but it's much more akin to an old, classic-style Zelda experience than a more modern one like Breath of the Wild. But is it a breath of fresh air? Well, let's find out. Developed by Corn Fox and Brothers, who are a Finnish-based independent game developer, they wanted to build upon the original formula that they created with Oceanhorn once. And when I say created, I mean took from certain other games, but managed to make their own. This time around, the story is set 1,000 years before the events of the first game, and you're introduced very early on to a character called Mesmeroth, whom you take one look at and say, yeah, that's the bad guy. In completely unoriginal fashion, he raises a dark army to take over the world. And as a young, aspiring knight, you decide to hand over the job to someone else. That was a joke. You do it yourself. But you're not alone. Joining you on your adventures across Gaia, there's Trin, who's actually well voice acted, and the granddaughter of Arcadia's leader, Archimedes, and this slightly unusual robot, who for some unknown reason has a samurai weapon. In terms of the gameplay, you control your character with the left stick, moving the camera with the right, and you'll find a sprint button. Straight away, I was hoping that, unlike the iOS version that I played, they'd have introduced an actual jump button, but they haven't. You simply move to the edge and your character will automatically jump. It's a small thing, but it's something which instantly makes me feel like I'm not in control, and also something that you always see when playing a mobile game to keep it easy to control. Early on, you'll unlock your shield, as well as a caster weapon, which can be used to equip different magics. Your trusty sword does basic slash attacks, and you'll be pressing every button looking for the auto lock on, but unfortunately that doesn't exist unless you're using the shield. Holding the trigger to bring up the shield will lock you onto the nearest enemy, but as soon as you let go, you lose your lock, which is a bit of an issue. It's quite a strange omission when you think that they're basing their systems on the best aspects of, well, Zelda, and not having that in the combat will be quite noticeable to some players. I was able to overcome it quite quickly, but it's a strange choice for sure. You can use those ranged weapons on the enemies, and you'll need to keep an eye on your stamina, as if this falls too low, you won't be able to make any more attacks, and you'll have to wait a short while. One thing that really stood out to me playing through this time was how unusual the enemy artificial intelligence is. Now, obviously, you wouldn't expect them to be overly intelligent, but for combat to be truly excellent, there has to be an almost back and forward flow between the player and the enemy that you gradually learn. And here it's just a bit erratic, and not in a designed way, almost like there's only so many paths or options they have, and some of these are limiting and stopping the enemy being able to engage in certain environments. It's difficult to articulate it just didn't feel quite right. That same feeling pervades many of the other elements, and you won't find any gyroscopic controls for the gun weapons, but rather things are kept quite simple in that regard. Exploration is done quite nicely in the game, and every area usually hides some form of small secret, whether it be coins or other scraps and pickups. When you crawl inside a tree trunk or under a building, it will switch to a first-person view, and more often than not, you'll be able to find something hidden away. Characters that you meet around the world, even if they don't offer you a quest, will generally point to some hidden item or object that you can go looking for. And although there's no real climbing mechanics here, there's a touch of verticality in being able to climb up ladders or climb up the vines that are dotted around. As alluded to at the beginning of this review, I would much more liken this to an early Zelda experience, and as so, it has classic feeling dungeon areas. In many ways, for me, these were the best aspects of the game. They're not overly complex, but they felt like one of the more coherent elements. You really do begin to appreciate the work that Nintendo put into their games whenever you play something that's inspired by one of them. But I will say there are a couple of nice boss fights here. The final aspect I really want to cover are your companions. In a clear move to differentiate itself, you're able to have a few companions along with you who can also fight and help you solve puzzles, so you can tell them to go and stand on a switch while you jump up and grab a chest, or to join you in combat. You can issue these commands with quite simple button press, but once again, the gameplay is writing checks the artificial intelligence can't cash, and more often than not, they're not very useful. Overall then, the game controls well enough. There were a few aspects missing for me, such as the ability to jump at will, as well as locking on to enemies that you choose to. I enjoyed the puzzle segments, and if you're after something that's a bit like Zelda, but in the same way as your mum would make you a Batman costume for a Halloween party, then this might be the one for you. Gameplay for me scores 14 out of 20, and the controls score 15 out of 20. As far as visuals and audio go, they've done a pretty good job. If you were a fan of the first game, then you'll undoubtedly know that the music was composed by Cal Litalo. I think that's how you pronounce it. I'm sure it's a silent Y. Either way, the music was excellent and he did a great job. He reprises his role as the composer for Oceanhorn 2, and that's why it's one of the best aspects of the game. I wouldn't say it was quite as catchy as the music from the first title, but it's still excellent, and you can always tell when a composer uses real instruments rather than fully synthetic sounds. As far as the rest of the soundscape of the game goes, it doesn't quite hold up to the same level. Sound effects can be quite sparse, with a few of the discovered item sounds not really working too well for me. Voice acting though is decent, with the whole cast voice acted and putting on some quite impressive performances.
I was having a nice streak.
It adds a layer of polish to the game, which does a semi-decent job of veiling some of its more clunkier aspects. In terms of visuals, well, it looks lovely, yes, but I really wish I hadn't played it through on my iPad first, because over there it was running at full resolution and 60 frames per second, and here it's running at a good resolution and 30 frames per second. It looks decent, but I can't unsee what I've already seen. When completely stationary, the world looks lovely, but unfortunately animations aren't quite up to snuff, and once again I'm reminded of how good Nintendo are at the minuscule character animations they put into their titles. Overall, I give audio 16 out of 20, and the visuals and performance also score 16 out of 20. The final aspect you're going to be wondering about is the value, and well, it's far too expensive, isn't it? They're asking for £29.99. Now correct me if I'm wrong, it's £5 to use the Apple Arcade. I know you don't necessarily own the games in air quotes, but asking for 6 times as much to own a digital version, not so sure about that. It's around 20 hours long, which is an okay length, I guess, and it is fun enough, but I'd be waiting for a 50% sale at least on this one. Don't get me wrong, you're going to enjoy it, and if you look at this and you hear this review and you think, yeah, a slightly less impressive Zelda clone is what I'm after, crack on. But for everyone else who is coming up to Christmas and living in these times, it would be remiss of me not to say, wait for a sale. And it is a shame that there's no physical version, as perhaps physically owning something like this for maybe £25 would have been okay. A 20-hour semi-decent Zelda clone gets a value score of 13 out of 20. Overall, I hope I haven't come over overly critical of Oceanhorn 2. It is an enjoyable enough game, it just has its design limitations. It gets an overall SwitchUp score of 74%. Let me know down in the comments, is this one you picked up immediately or are going to, or perhaps you'll add it to your watch list and wait for a sale. Thanks to all our patrons who support us each and every month, and to all of you who watch our content. If you enjoyed the video, obviously subscribe, I don't need to say that. If you didn't, then don't. For all things Switch, all the time, keep it Switch up. Cheers guys, see ya!